Welcome to Women on Wisdom. I'm your host, Sandra Boyd, and this is where real stories meet urgent truth. It's estimated that it will take nearly 124 years to close the gender gap. That's just way too long. We can no longer depend on governments, workplaces, or even women's groups to lead the change. It's up to us to have the tough conversations, challenge old stories, and reclaim our power. The time for waiting is over. The movement starts now, one woman at a time. Welcome to Women on Wisdom. I'm your host, Sandra Boyd. Today we delve into a conversation that is both heartbreaking and profoundly hopeful. We're joined by Chris Coulter, a man whose life was forever changed by the loss of his daughter, Maddie, to suicide. Chris bravely shares his devastating journey and how he channeled that pain into a mission to ensure that no parent has to walk the same path. His work with Mentor Well is a beacon of hope and a testament to turning tragedy into action. Hello, Chris, and welcome to the show. I am so honored to have you on the show. And the topic that we're talking about is suicide, specifically suicide in young women. And we're talking about your journey with your daughter, Maddie. But before we get started and into the questions and learning more about Maddie, I'd just like to share with the audience a little bit more about the rise of suicide amongst young women. And in North America, historically, suicide has been higher for men, but in the last 10 years, studies show that young girls and women between the age of 10 and 24 have been particularly vulnerable. And some of the contributions to that vulnerability and to suicide have been around mental health conditions, social media, and cyberbullying. And I'd like to pause there and I'd like to say that again because it is a huge contributing factor: social media and cyberbullying, academic and social pressures, identity development, trauma and abuse, family and relationship issues, and access, or therefore the lack of access, to mental health. So, Chris, I was so fortunate to hear you on a show speaking about your journey with Maddie and your continued journey with her. But I would like to start with just understanding how all of this, your passion for what you're doing right now and helping people and other families. Tell us about Maddie and tell us what's unfolded over the last number of years.
Thanks, Sandra. It's an honor to be here. Maddie, I lost Maddie to suicide in April 2015, and the the challenges around that, there probably are a number of contributing figures or variables. One, I believe, was the divorce of her mom and I, and she faced a lot of pressure to kind of make a decision for the family whether the boys were going to live in Canada with me or move to Europe with their mom. And so, being the eldest, she was at an age at that point she was about 12 or 13, and she basically made the decision for her brothers and herself, and they elected to stay in Canada. But I know it put a lot of pressure on her because she told me as such. And you never want to put, you want to never want to put that burden on a child. Unfortunately, under the circumstances, there was no other choice. So she struggled. Um, it when you go through divorce, new homes, new routines, new friends,
Mm-hmm.
you're that stable environment that you grow accustomed to has been shattered. And I believe that was probably the single largest contributor to her depression and ultimately her suicide. So as far as Maddie was this incredibly funny, um, she was kind. She was one of those ones who, and this is the interesting thing. She's my only girl, but I noticed early
Mm.
on a lot of the cattiness that happens, especially within young girls. And she didn't
Oh, yes.
and she did not subject herself to that. She didn't conform to kind of the popular opinion. She always had a belief in what she believed in. She stood up to bullies and stood up for the underdogs. And I think that and you don't always hear about the the kindness that happens by way of her friends, but it was only after her passing that I found out all these beautiful tributes that were forwarded to me and stories about how she had done some beautiful thing for a number of different people. And it wasn't about acknowledgement or validation for her. It was just being kind. And I'm very blessed to, I believe, have inherited some of her kindness as a consequence.
It must have been such a comfort for you to have people share the stories and about Maddie and what she's done to support other people and her kindness. That must have been a real comfort.
She's it absolutely was. And the one thing about experience of traumatic loss, and in particular the loss of a child, the one thing parents never want to have happen is for people to forget about them. And
No.
it's legacy is everything. That's why things like mentioning mentioning her name, just in conversation. How are you doing? We really miss Maddie, or someone sharing a story, or a photograph, or a video. Those are the things from a grieving parent's perspective that you can't get enough of, and it's so important. So, just a message to your listenership: if you have someone or know someone who is grieving a loss of a loved one, people are very reluctant to share it because they feel it might be triggering. But in this particular case, it may bring tears, but it will bring tears of joy, especially this time of year.
Especially this time of the year. And one of the things I shared with you that I learned, um, a couple of years ago when we had a loss in our family was that the person that called me up to see how I was, she asked me to tell her about the person that had passed. And for me, that was just it was so wonderful to be able to share that story and the it's to be asked that question and to continue on and Maddie continues on walking by your side in the work that you're doing and so after such a profound loss, how did you find the strength to channel your grief into creating Mentor Well and turning your personal tragedy into your mission to help other families?
Well, it wasn't an overnight thing, I tell you that. Gr the grief journey is very, I'll call it peculiar, and it's very
Mm.
predictable, and it's not linear at all. And for the first number of years, the only thing I was really able to do was to write. And I wrote initially for myself, but then I realized that if I started publishing some of this stuff, it might help other people as well. And when I started to publish about our journey with Maddie, what our ordeal looked like, I started getting all these messages from other parents about saying, "Thank you very much for sharing this. This is something we've been dealing with our teenager." And so this this flood of communication from parents, I recognized, wow, this is such an epidemic that we're facing. And in and then post COVID, it
Oh,
or
yes.
during COVID, uh, and that's when I really started to voice my opinion and share my story and doing interviews and podcasts. I recognized that, I think this is something that I need to talk about. So in the last in the last 2 years in particular, I've probably had conversations with about 2,000, more than 2,000 parents. And the three questions I get more than anything else is, how do I know if my child is struggling, as opposed to just normal teenage behavior? The second is, how do I get my teen to open up to me and break down the walls and build bridges? And the third is, where can I go for resources that will be able to help? And so I that was kind of the and that was a recurring theme. It was probably 5 times more people would ask me those questions than all the other questions combined. So the grief journey is interesting. So when all of a sudden the heaviness starts to lift, you feel you feel like you've got all these initiatives you want to do. Oh, I have to do this, 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 and this. And so I had about 30 things and I tried to do them all simultaneously. The one thing that a lot of people don't realize, when you experience a traumatic loss, it impacts your brain. Your brain literally changes. And I thought I had like this onset of adult ADHD, and I went to my GP and said, "Chris, this is traumatic loss. You're dealing with grief, and you don't have the ability to make decisions as quickly. Your memory has become shot. It is a very interesting, strange dynamic that occurs, and so what I ended up doing is doing all these different things, and they fell on my face. And
Yeah.
I ended up being the executive director for a program someone approached me to run called How Are You Feeling, which taught kids about their emotions, because kids are not they're not taught about emotional intelligence in school. Self-regulation and self-awareness and conflict resolution and empathy. These are all elements that will serve our kids throughout their lifetime. And yet there's no focus on it anywhere else. So I got involved with this program and I absolutely loved it. And it was so impactful. And we went to a whole bunch of schools and kids and ran them through as part of their mandatory volunteer hours. And the kids literally said it changed their lives, that they were able to understand their emotions, how to process, and 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 that was this aha moment. And one particular group of eight young women who came to me afterward and said, "Chris, we absolutely love this. It's changed our lives. What can we do to advocate on its behalf?" And he said, "Listen, tell your administrators, tell your principals, tell your guidance and wellness counselors what this program did for you." And they did. And they came back all disappointed because they said, I'm sorry, but they said, we already have all of our programs in place. And meanwhile, we do some onboarding questions and then post program questions. And they would say, we'd ask them, how impactful are the mental health programs that you're taking in school? 95% of them said they were a complete waste of time. So
Yep.
it was a travesty, and I had to step away because it wasn't the only time it occurred. When a teenager says to you that something changes your life, you listen. you don't you don't you don't usurp that for your own opinion. You need to empower and embody what they say, and incorporate that in some way. So I step back. I'm still an advisor, but I needed to step back because the schools were really frustrating me. So, and I was angry. I really was angry, because I knew.
It must have felt like you were, trying to push the boulder uphill and it keeps coming back down at you. I I can't even imagine your frustration. I did hear a story yesterday I was sharing with one of my colleagues. I was sharing with him that I was going to be interviewing you today in your story. And then he subsequently shared with me that his very good friends, they lost their daughter when she was 15 to suicide. Except for when it happened, the parents were caught off guard completely, had no idea she'd been suffering, thought, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, it was really around, teenage angst, young women, hormones, which hormones play a lot. So my question for you is what's the most crucial warning signs, particularly with young women, that might miss, parents might miss with their child struggling with mental health or having suicidal thoughts? And what should they be actively looking for and listening for?
I believe, and obviously there's so many different variables. When
Yes.
a child seems to spend an excessive amount of time in their room, um, and
Okay.
and wanting privacy is, it's not unique to being a teenager, but when they're doing it in complete isolation and not participating in with friends or families, that that is a red flag. When they start when they start to lose the love of things that they once really held a passion for. In Maddie's case, it was swimming. She was a competitive swimmer. And you could just tell her whole attitude and disposition towards swimming. She was fighting the water. And that was really just, that was the storm inside of her head. So if they had interests, it could be sports, it could be crafts, it could be music, and all of a sudden they become disinterested, that is a red flag. Um, when they start kind of almost jokingly start talking about whether they want to be here, or the world won't miss me if I'm gone, and
Okay.
and 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 it sounds, well, yeah, that would be a red flag. But when they do it shielded by sarcasm, that's that.
Which teenagers are known to be sarcastic.
Absolutely. um the communication piece, if they're, yeah, if their eating and sleeping habits drastically change, they're overindulging, or they're not eating, or they're sleeping too much or not sleeping at all, those are also red flags. And if all of a sudden you see a sudden drop in school grades,
Mm.
um, or with sports, if they're just kind of going through the motions where before they were just intensive, um, those are also red flags that I would definitely kind of go, hmm. The problem is, as parents, we tend to chalk too many of these behaviors up to teenager behaviors or hormones. And so we
Yes.
justify it. Um, Unfortunately, when you've got social media and access to smartphones, this this is something that is becoming the new norm. And I've always said I couldn't imagine being a teenager today. The stuff that
No.
the stuff with social media, you go to a party and you make a mistake, you could be scrutinized, and that digital imprint could be left on someone indefinitely. So those are also, like, that's something else I think parents need to be very mindful of. The other thing, and I know kids are getting their phones really, really early. Um,
Yes.
and it has become a graduated process. I remember, I think Maddie was in maybe grade 7 or grade 8, and my son Zach, I think, was a year younger, and then Sawyer, my youngest, because he was going home on the bus, I wanted to get him a phone, so we got him a phone at 5. It's making sure they have the emotional maturity to be able to understand the significance. And there are some great assessment tools, whether your child is ready for a smartphone or get something that doesn't have all just has text and phone capabilities without necessarily having all the access to
Wow,
the
that
apps.
is I didn't know that. And I will say I know that yesterday, and I haven't read the article, so I'm have to look into this more. That Australia's come out with some rules around people under 16 and technology and smartphones. But it also, to me, it's really ironic that we have this epidemic of issues that go back to technology and cyberbullying and all the rest of it. And a couple of things. We're always fearful of interfering with our children's privacy. Yet, if you look at people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, they wouldn't allow their children to have iPads and iPhones. So, doesn't that tell us something around the impact that technology is having? So, beyond the family, what role do broader systems like schools, communities, and societies play in the mental health crisis for particularly young women? Because this is on the rise for young women. And I don't ever also, I think there is hormones is a really big play here as well. And so and the research is starting to come out. But what do you think beyond family is a role of society? And you just talked about schools having an opportunity to have a bigger impact, yet going, yeah, no, we'll stick with what we have, as opposed to looking beyond what could possibly be. I hope you're really enjoying this episode of Women on Wisdom. We are sponsored by TalentWise Collective. And my question for you today is, what's your organization doing to drive the equitable change we desperately need? TalentWise Collective supports organizations to empower their employees with services and programs such as coaching and transformative workshops and my interactive talk, Bridging the Gap, which is designed for immediate and impactful action. And please, let's not forget about the upcoming International Women's Day 2026. It's just around the corner, and it's the perfect time to invest in your leaders and your employees. Reach out to Connect TWC at talentwisecollective.com. That's Connect TWC at talentwisecollective.com. Let's build a truly equitable future together.
I think a really important piece, Sandra, are kids understanding their emotions. What there are a lot of heavy topics that they're exposed to on social media, yet they don't have the context to understand it because they're not taught. Schools avoid the really sensitive subjects like
Yeah.
suicide, depression, grief. Um, it, and I think by avoiding it, we are doing a disservice to our kids. And whether we teach them as a family or whether it's schools or some other vehicle, I think the the importance of having things like social emotional learning programs or emotional intelligence, access to emotional intelligence programs within the school framework is so important. And we teach them all the kind of what we deem the essential skills, but there's nothing more important than understanding our own brain and understanding how we regulate that. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
You know, I just want to say if there's anybody out there that's listening from academia or knows somebody who's in academia, knows someone who's on the school boards, please forward this message because I just don't think that the schools are doing enough and playing a big enough role of having these honest conversations
And,
and how important these conversations are.
and I'm just going to add one other point in that. And I believe that I believe the schools, I think a lot of it comes down to a liability standpoint. They believe that by saying, by talking about suicide and something actually triggers someone and they happen to, then they might face potential liability. But studies have shown that there's a far greater percentage of of it having a neutralizing effect or a positive effect upon kids by talking about these subjects, asking someone if they feel suicidal or if they feel like harming themselves. That has a 40% reduction in the effect. If someone is thinking about it and nothing is said, there's a 40% greater probability of someone actually acting out on that. So, but they don't want to teach it in school. Someone goes out and does it, and then they feel a lawsuit. Now, this is all speculation on my part, but I'm not alone in my beliefs either.
No, you're not. You're absolutely not alone. So, how can these systems better support, you know, support uh, children? You've talked a little bit about that, but I'd like to know more about Mentor Well and what you're doing to support children and bridging the gap. Because when I heard what you were doing, having in my family experience mental health, having to get support for children in our family, I I felt that it was so hard to get to a therapist, to get the counseling, to get the programs. But you are doing something that I believe is so important to bridging the gap. So please talk more about Mentor Well.
So the mentor well is really my tribute to Maddie, and it's what I wish we had access to when we were going through our divorce. So when Maddie was entertaining whether she was going to continue swimming competitively or not. What we are is it's an online youth mentoring service, and it what I like to refer to it as it's a bridge between parenting and therapy. And parents cannot be a mentor to their kids as much as many believe they can. There's just too much of an emotional stake involved to be objective. They also control the punitive aspect of the relationship. So
Yeah.
sharing something with your parent and then facing repercussions because you told them the truth is damaging, and it's also a surefire way to get your kid to shut down. The other aspect about parenting, parents, when a child starts to open up and share things, there's an instinct parents have, and I know it comes from a place of love, but it they they step into advice giving mode, or they try to
I am so guilty of that.
they try to, oh, well,
It's
I
so,
so was I. And
yeah.
it's something now I've conditioned myself to catch myself. And I've also told my kids, if I start doing this, shut me down right away. And so that is, and parents, and when they do that, the communication stops. So what do? They kind of sit in the background and go, okay, are they going to talk to me? Are they not going to talk to me? And some parents will become vigilant and go, "Oh, we have to get our child in to see a therapist." Well, they're not necessarily broken. They don't necessarily need a therapist at that point. What we need is some adult figure who will sit alongside them in a non-judgmental manner and just listen. And if the kids do want advice, then I I teach my mentors to ask this one very revealing question. If you're unsure whether they want advice or just want you to kind of lean in and listen, ask them, do you want, is this going to be a fix it or a feel it conversation? Meaning, is do you want my advice to help to resolve this, or do you just want me to kind of sit here without judgment and just take it all in? And they'll tell you. And if they tell you,
And it's a brilliant strategy, and one that, I know is used in coaching and other forms of connecting with people. So why aren't we using it with our children? So that is very brilliant. So tell me more about the program.
so so that's where we have our qualifications are really our lived experience and our willingness to sit and listen to kids who are on their journey. And so we pair kids who are going through specific, so use the divorce example. If we can take a mentor who maybe 5 or 10 years previously had encountered a painful divorce with their parents, to share that how they got through it, or the fact that they got through it, and it's as heavy as the emotion is at times, just knowing that someone else who's been there before, from a relatability and empathy standpoint, it's the ability, as opposed to kind of acknowledging it and then just pushing it downward. This gives them the ability to be able to, in a safe space, without emotion attached to it, just being able to share what's really going on in their heads. And that is the start to being able to communicate, as opposed to just sucking it up and shoving it
Mm,
downward, because we all know when we don't give those emotions an outlet, they come back and bite us in the butt somewhere else down the road. So
absolutely.
uh so so that's the mentor well, the mentoring aspect of it. The other really important thing that I didn't realize at the time, and going back to those three questions that I had talked about earlier, if we don't if parents can't identify what when a child is struggling, we need to educate them. And so what better way to educate them than through their workforce? And so and this stat is what I found really mind-boggling, Sandra. But 1 in 4 working parents is dealing with a child who is struggling with their mental health. And
It's astonishing.
when your child struggles, you as a parent struggle as well. There's a sense of desperation, there's the shame factor, be it
Yeah.
on as a parent or as an employee. And so what happens in 80% of those cases, parents don't share anything that's going on at work. So what happens? They're either absent from work, or presenteeism is something that occurs, meaning they go to work, but they spend their time completely preoccupied, because you can't help but bring that stuff to work, because
No.
it is your most important thing in your world. And and
What is that old saying that they say about you're only as a parent, you're only as healthy mentally, spiritually, emotionally as your healthiest child is something
yes.
to that effect. Yes, and that is true because if there's something wrong with your children, you and I've experienced it myself. You may be there physically, but mentally and emotionally, you've left the building for sure.
So so what we do is we go to corporations and we talk about these stats, that if you don't think it's impacting your productivity and your bottom line, then we give them this eye opening. So that's why we offer these what we've called our Lifeline Parent Workshops. And so we take parents, and just for context sake, so if it's 1 in 4 working parents, on average about 65% of employees are parents. That translates into 18% of your workforce. So by educating, first session is talking to parents how to identify if their kid is struggling, or if they're actually if they're just it's just exuding teenage behavior. The second session is about how you build these bridges and not walls with
Mm.
your child, and we give them some strategies that they can walk through and start using when they go home that night. I wouldn't suggest kind of giving them the whole gambit at once, but um, okay, someone went to a
And
course.
yeah, yeah. I remember going through my coaching course, and finally my kids and my husband said, "Will you stop coaching us, practicing your coaching on us?" So, yeah, they pick it up real quickly.
But and then the third part is walking through some really usable resources that they can start using immediately. So what happens, and often, because there's a number of employees that are dealing with a child who might be in crisis, and as a consequence, they just don't they don't sorry, I'm going to ask the pause. All right. um and and so there are people in our sessions who are going through this actively. And what happens, they all of a sudden, they may have a child who is seeking a therapist, and therapists could be kind of 3 to 6 months before they get in front of the right therapist. So what we want to do is we give them an expedited referral service. So as opposed to being able to get a diagnosis and put in front of the right referral practitioner in months, we're able to speed that up to sometimes days or weeks. And and when a child and a parent are in crisis, even a week is too long. But what
Yes,
they do is they have a game plan. They have clarity. They have all of a sudden they've got this weight that has suddenly been anxiousness in the past, comes in the form of relief. And it translates almost immediately into productivity. And because when you're really struggling, it impacts your productivity. And I've heard numbers anywhere from 20 to 50%. And if you and that it has a trickle down effect to teams that also rely upon these individuals. So, and team
yes,
managers. So it is this insidious thing that needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, it's the thing that most companies have very little or no awareness for. So
So let me ask you this question. I just see this so valuable as an individual who's been, a mother, a caregiver, a leader and executive in organizations, and have seen employees like myself that have gone through the, different things that happen with our children, our families, and the impact that it has on productivity and engagement. And so, you look at during COVID, a lot of organizations, they added all these different programs, but they were still very difficult to get access to, or they weren't giving the kind of support that I'm hearing that you're giving. What has been the response from the corporate world and from HR that are looking after health and wellness? And the other thing that I do know is that many of these programs are not proven to, they add on, add on, add on. and sometimes they're doubling up on the same type of programs, and sometimes these programs are not as accessible to employees as they think they're going to be, nor are they actually showing any kind of, movement on the dial of actually helping people or people accessing them. Yet you're talking about a program that I feel like it's helping parents and it's helping the children. What's the response from the corporate world?
It depends on the corporate environment. If it is an employee centric company who truly values their employees for more than just the work they do and recognize that their 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 work and their family life can't help but be connected. Um, and I and that's the difficult measurement is what is the ROI on some of this stuff. It's I've I've tried to create an ROI model, and it's really difficult to do because the numbers are all over the place. Um,
Yeah.
it but overall it's been very well received, and a lot of HR people and a lot of team leaders go, wow, you don't realize the gap that exists between from an employee benefit standpoint. And I guess it comes down to prevention versus remediation. Remediation gets the money and it gets the attention. Unfortunately, prevention, if you get in front of it early enough, you can you can remove a lot of things like your employee benefit costs that would that would be reflective by someone being in crisis, because it's not only just the child who's impacted, it's also the counseling required for parents often. So,
Oh, yeah.
um, but
And you have a background in benefits too, so you're able to
yeah, so
speak their language, understand, and we just have to understand also too. There is, this is more about engagement and productivity and all the rest of it. You can't measure ROI around the emotional well-being of somebody who's could be at risk of losing their child. So, but your experience, you can work with HR and you can work with organizations from not just someone who's experienced this tragic loss with Maddie, but is also shaping something that's completely different to support people within organizations and understand the ins and outs of the benefit world.
and just to that point, there was one other aspect of the mentor well that I we always looked at this as an advocacy program for teens. It's a safe space for teens. It wasn't a pipeline of information that goes from the mentor back to the parent, because if
Yeah.
we breach that, it would the ability for a teenager to open up, it would be eliminated. So there's a confidentiality contract. However, that does not necessarily eliminate the worry for parents. So I've created, or I'm in the midst of creating, a community, a school community for parents who are going through this, because as parents, when you go through this, the shame, the loneliness, the isolation is
Mm.
scary, and you do feel like you are on an island and no one can relate to you. So creating this school community called Mentor Well Parent Circle. And what it's not kind of a thought leader program. It's really the ability for parents to be able to go into these discussion rooms and have chats with other people who are going through something very similar, from a relatability. And there's comfort in that. And I don't want it to be a Debbie Downer type of discussion room. I want it has to be humor. There has to be fun. And there also has to be a reason for people to want to stay and to come back and to refer. And that's the type of community I want to create for parents, because I know when I was going through it, and I'm sure you probably did as well, Sandra, it's a scary world. And you don't feel, even if you're talking to a friend, they don't get it unless they are
No,
in the weeds themselves.
they don't get it unless they get
Yeah.
it. They really, they understand, been there. It's really really hard, and as parents, you feel like, where have I failed? What have I done? We tend to put all the blame on us, and when anything goes wrong with our children, and I'm glad that you use, the word, like the shame, like you feel shame and you feel like, you're the only person, and what we don't know is behind closed doors there's so many other people that are experiencing the same as us. So to have groups where you can go to and people that you can talk to on both sides is just so important. Before I ask you the next question, I can't but help but ask, how are you now? I mean, your life has forever changed, but how are you now in your journey with Maddie, and how are you feeling?
It's interesting you asked that because many for many years, up until this year, in fact, I was always trying to get back to that person I was before losing Maddie. And when I finally acknowledged that I'm not supposed to get back to that person, I'm
Mm.
supposed to honor and embrace the person I've become. And there are aspects of the Chris 1.0 version that I certainly miss, but you know what? I think I'm a much more um, kinder, more compassionate, empathetic, and I think a softer version of my former self. And I I wrote I remember when I owned my first business, and I was in my 20s, and I had probably 70 employees working for us. And I couldn't understand, as at that point, I wasn't married, I didn't have kids. I couldn't relate to these employees who were staying home with their kids. And I didn't openly chastise them, but at the same time, I certainly in my head, I was going, can they not get someone to help them? And then all of a sudden you have kids and you go, oh, I get it now. So
It's amazing the empathy that happens when you have children, about how hard it is. And when you're younger, you like, what the heck? Get a babysitter.
but to answer your question, danced around the subject, but at the same time, I'm once I came to that realization, I'm not supposed to go back. And then also this beautiful thing that we're creating with the mentor well, and just seeing how many people are embracing it and acknowledging that is such an important tool for not just parents but for businesses as well. It's and I always say that Maddie is my co-pilot on this, and I literally
Yes.
feel her um, as my sidekick every single day because I, if I can say this, I believe one thing that I received from Maddie in her passing was that infinite kindness that I didn't get all of it, but I certainly got some of it. And I'm grateful for that. And I feel it in my heart. And I think because of that, I'm on you never move beyond it, as you said, Sandra, but you're able to move forward with it in a context that is something that, especially if you can wrap purpose around it. I always say this that I believe that grief is my superpower.
Yes. And I can, I certainly can feel Maddie on the journey with you, and her presence when you talk about her and about the work that you're doing. My last question, Chris, is that for all women and mothers, because we are women on wisdom, and we are trying to bridge the 124-year gap for equality with women. And part of that is the responsibilities and, that come with being women. But what for, women and mothers and mentors listening today, what's the most vital piece of wisdom that you want to share to help actively support young women in their lives of work towards the, preventing, this type of heartbreak?
I People ask me a similar question framed differently, but as parents, as mothers to their kids, when they're going through their challenges, and they will, is don't make your default setting to respond with advice. Listen first. And if you feel that they may want your advice, ask them. Use that, is this a fix it or feel it conversation. And it's
I
amazing.
love that.
It's amazing the dynamic of that relationship between a mother and a daughter will change. It as I say, it's simple, but it's not easy, because we are predisposed to jumping in, and it's not as it comes from a place of love, and we only want the best for our kids. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, advice giving, even as I say, even the best advice, if it's not asked for, is still active. It's okay. I muddled that one up, but all right.
Oh, you know
I
what?
can't even quote myself. So
But you know what? Your wisdom, and I will say, as a woman and who's surrounded by women, we love to fix things really quickly, and I know that men do too. But women have a special fix it on our shoulders and through that we carry. So your wisdom on those questions, on that one particular question, I think is I'll use the word wise. So, but thank you so much for sharing your journey. We will have your bio so that people can reach out to you, human resources professionals or organizations that are looking at a program that can make a huge difference in their employees' lives. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining me today.
thanks for the opportunity to be able to share it. Thanks, Sandra.
We are at a crucial juncture in history, and our equality is not a nice to have. It is now beyond negotiation. This is our future, our fight.
This episode of Women on Wisdom is sponsored by TalentWise Collective, a global talent development company that curates solutions for your organization's needs and culture. Please note that the opinions and comments of the guests or hosts may not align with TalentWise Collective. If you are interested in having Sandra speak at an event, or wish to reach out for any other inquiries, you can connect through our email at connecttwc@talentwisecollective.com. That is, connecttwc@talentwisecollective.com. Thank you.